the Vivobarefoot Primus Lite 3.5. So 3 things to like with this shoe. Number one, as an all-around barefoot shoe for both training and daily wear, this model does really well. And that's honestly why I love the Primus Lite 3. So the 3.5 I think is actually a slightly leveled up quality shoe compared to the 3. The 3 is great, don't get me wrong, it has worked really well for my needs for a year plus now at this point. But with the 3.5, they reworked the upper up here on the forefoot, and I really enjoy that change. It gives this shoe a slightly more sporty look, and I do think that this material is a little bit more secure when it comes to locking that foot down when you're doing any form of like athletic style training. So think catching power cleans or doing any form of jump or plyometric. The shoe has done a really good job. So if you want that all-arounder, this model will deliver. The second thing to like with the Primus Lite 3.5 is the breathability of the upper. So with this model, you have this mesh upper that runs throughout the forefoot and the lateral midfoot here. The boot is also pretty lightweight and there is ventilation back here. So if you are somebody who lives in a warmer climate or you train in hotter gyms and you need as much ventilation as possible, this can be a good option to go with. Also, if you take out the insole and you want to train barefoot in this shoe, you can, and it should remain relatively stink-free, granted, unless you have like crazy stinky feet. Obviously, case-by-case basis here, but I do think this is a better option for that if that's something you enjoy, to keep your feet stink-free at least relatively for the most part. The third thing to like with the shoe is the Primus outsole. So I love this outsole when the Vivobarefoot uses it in their shoes, and if you are newer to barefoot shoes and you don't mind spending a little bit more for that single shoe, and let's say you're a beginner and you don't mind dropping 160 plus for your barefoot shoes, this can be a really good option to go with in my opinion. This Primus outsole has a stack height of around 5.5 millimeters, and you can also take that insole out and the internal is finished, so you get a nice variety of cushions and ground feels with this shoe. And it also runs pretty wide, and it doesn't have the most aggressive taper to the midfoot, so it should work for a wide range of anatomies, especially for somebody who's just getting into barefoot shoes and they might not necessarily know how much width they need and whatnot. This can be a good option to go with. But now let's talk about a couple of cons that I have with the Primus Lite 3.5. So 2 cons that I have with the Primus Lite 3.5 is number 1, the shoe still runs pretty long, and so without half sizes, it can be kind of problematic to get your sizing right in the shoe, and that is honestly an issue and many other folks that also have with the Primus shoes from Vivobarefoot. If you go to any one of my videos, comments on comments on comments of us going back and forth about sizing and whatnot. This is a size 10. I wear a size 10 in most shoes. However, in this shoe, I have about a thumb's length of space at the end of my toe box, and then that also leaves the boot a little bit more spacious than I would prefer. So if I cinch it down in the midfoot, it works fine. But that is one of those quality of life things that I would just prefer to, have a shoe that fits a little bit more true. And if I go down, then it feels a little bit too snug. And so it's really awkward to get your sizing right. I would say if you are in between sizes and you typically have like a finger's width of space at the end of your toe box now, so think like a centimeter or 2, you might want to go down. And then if you are in between and you typically push the end of your toe box now in your half size, go up. I think that would be the general ruling for this. And obviously if you have an exceptionally wide foot, err on the side of going up, and then if you have a narrow foot, you're going to want to go down. But again, this model will run a little bit long, and that is a gripe that I have with the Primus shoes in general. The second con that I have with this model, and it's kind of a quality of life thing, is the Primus Lite 3. One of my issues was the short laces that would constantly come undone. That was also an issue other folks had. Then they swapped them out for those thicker laces, and they were kind of awkward. And now we have these newer laces, which are longer, and they're a little bit thinner. Now, I like these laces from a security standpoint. They do a pretty good job. My issue with them, though, is that they run kind of long. And so because this shoe runs long for my foot anatomy, I have to cinch it down in the midfoot, and then that gives me super long laces. This model is a little bit looser right now, but if I have to really crank them down for training, these just get a little bit long and I have to like double knot them and stuff or stick them in here so they don't poke out. So it's one of those quality of life things. It's not the biggest deal. It's not going to technically hinder performance, but it is one of those things that I'm just like, why can't we just make these laces a little bit shorter? But for the most part, I have really liked the Primus Lite 3.5. It does feel like a nice leveled up. I also appreciate that they called it the 3.5 versus the 4. One of my gripes with the Primus Lite 4 all weather is that that shoe is essentially a 3 just with a different upper. This model has a slightly tweaked upper, so I can appreciate that they call it a 3.5. I think it's a little bit easier to understand from a consumer standpoint. When I buy a new model, I expect something very different, or at least more unique, in the sense of, okay, if this is a new iteration, like what's really new with the shoe? Is a sole change or something like that with the tech? That is something I think about. So I do appreciate that they called it the 3.5, but now let's talk about the performance of this shoe. When it comes to the performance of the Primus Lite 3.5, I'll discuss how this shoe does for lift lifting, cross training, short runs, and daily wear. In the context of lifting, the shoe does a really good job for 3 reasons. Number one, the outsole I think does a good job gripping different surfaces in the gym. So on wooden platforms or rubber gym floors, this shoe works great. It might just fall short for heavier sled pushes, so definitely keep that in mind if that is your training ask or a big part of your training. So think like heavy sled work or any form of work on turf where you're really digging into the forefoot, you may want to look into a different barefoot shoe, but I think for most settings, this outsole will give you enough grip to match your lifting needs. The second reason why I like this shoe for lifting is the width of it. So I think if you want ample toe box room, this can be a good option to go with. And I also appreciate that it's not so wide to where if you have a D, E, double E width foot, you don't feel like you're completely swimming in it, which you can in some barefoot shoes. So if that is your foot anatomy, this can be a great option, I think, to give you width, but then also not feel so spacious to where you're sliding around all the time. So when catching cleans and whatnot, you're not spilling over the sole constantly and whatnot. So I do appreciate the width and the feel of the shoe. I also like that the midfoot's not super aggressive, so it allows that arch to do its thing when you're training as well. The third reason why I like this shoe for training is the flexibility and the ground feel. So when I'm training, I will typically take out this insole here, especially if I'm doing any form of back day or lower body day where I want as much ground feel as possible. I appreciate this feature, and if you are newer to barefoot shoes, you can leave that insole in, and it'll give you a little bit more cushion, not a ton, but a little bit, and I do appreciate that with this model, and it has a good flexibility, and with that lightweight upper, it just feels like a very seamless shoe to wear for lifting settings. When it comes to cross training, the shoe works pretty good. Now, there are 2 things that I like with the shoe, and then 2 gripes I have with the shoe. The things I like include, number 1, I do like the upper change in this model. It does feel a little bit better regarding security for the most part with this model's reworked toe box here and this textile overlay on the midfoot. The second reason why I like the shoe for cross training is the lightweight nature and breathability of the upper. If you want a shoe that breathes really well in hotter settings, and if you are constantly training in gyms that run really hot, like for example, I train in gyms in Austin, Texas all the time that are wicked hot, this can be a really good option to go with. Now, my 2 gripes with this shoe include, number 1, since they run long, I think some folks will find that they probably slide around in this model, especially if you can't get this midfoot tight enough to give you the security you need to prevent you from sliding forward. So for example, a case like where I have this issue even when I tighten the laces is if I'm doing broad jumps. Now, broad jumps are a very specific plyo, and not everybody's gonna be doing them, but when you are going that hard in the toe box and you're landing, I found that I slid a little bit in the shoe, and because this boot does have a lighter material, it doesn't necessarily lock the foot down super hardcore, so definitely something to think about. The second reason why I don't love this shoe for cross training is the laces. Like I can't get around them, and I do not like having to adjust my laces when I'm training, so even if I tuck them and they pop out, it's just one of those things that annoys me. Again, it's not gonna completely tank your cross training performance, but it is one of those quality of life things. And if you have a lower instep or a lower volume foot, you're likely going to pick up on that a lot more. If you have a thicker foot or a normal instep, or if you just don't have to crank down the laces as much because you fill the whole shoe, that's likely not going to be an issue for you either. For short runs, this model does an okay job. I like them for shorter intervals and bouts up to like 1 to 2 miles. Now, you can run longer distances in this shoe, but that's just what I have tested them for. They have worked well for that. They are very consistent, and that's exactly how I used to use my Primus Lite 3 and Primus Lite Knit for in those running verticals. When it comes to daily wear, I like this shoe a lot. It has a slightly more sporty look, I think, than the Primus Lite 3, but it is still a barefoot shoe that you can wear out and about and dress up. So I do appreciate that with this model. And now when it comes to the scores of this shoe, for lifting, I would give this shoe an 8.5 out of 10. For cross training, I'd give it a 7.5 out of 10. For short runs, a strong 7.5 out of 10. And then for daily wear, an 8 out of 10. When it comes to the price of the Primus Lite 3.5, you can expect to pay $160. Now that price point is right in line with the Primus Lite 3. Now, which should you go with? Honestly, I would go based on colorways. Both of these models will work great for lifting and then casual wear. So if you don't necessarily love this colorway, because I believe this is the only colorway available at the moment for the 3.5, go with one of the other options with the 3. It will perform just the same, and you're not really missing anything. And if you want to save 10 to 20% on your purchase, I do have a code for these. It's the same code that I use when I buy these shoes for reviews, because I buy all the things I review. There is no bias here. That is going to be linked down below, and it's also on the screen down at the bottom here. All right, now let's answer the question, who should buy the Vivobarefoot Primus Lite 3.5? Number 1, I think if you are somebody looking for that do-it-all barefoot shoe for training and then also daily wear, and in your training you like to lift, do athletic style work, and then some short runs here and there, this can be a great option to go with. Number 2, I think if you live in warmer and hotter climates, this can be a great option to go with, especially for the active individual. The breathability of this shoe works great, and the materials tend to do really well in hotter climates as well. And then the third context where I think this shoe makes a lot of sense is if you're brand new to barefoot shoes and you don't mind dropping a little bit more for your first pair, I think this can be a really good like do-it-all first model to purchase. Now, who shouldn't buy this shoe? Number 1, if you have a narrow foot, you may want to steer clear of this model just because with it running long to begin with, if you size down, the sizing might still be a little bit off, so definitely tread lightly if that's going to be you. Keep them in really good condition when you first buy them so you can return them or exchange them if you need to. The second context is if you're somebody who lives in a warmer climate and you need a shoe with a bit more warmth through the upper that you can wear out and about and then to go train in, this may not be your best option. With this mesh, it is very breathable and very ventilated. If you get cold feet often, you have been warned, this shoe is not going to give you the warmth you need. You might want to look into options like the PRIMUS LITE 4 all weather. That's going to give you a bit more warmth and protection from very cold air going through the upper in this shoe. The third context where I think the shoe can fall short in the context of training is if you need a barefoot shoe for CrossFit, there will be WODs where this model I think falls short. You might want to look into the Motor Strength for that ask. Its upper is going to be a little bit more abrasion resistant for the asks of CrossFit. All right, so you don't want to go with the PRIMUS LITE 3.5, but you want that barefoot shoe for training and daily wear. What else should you consider or go with? So there are two options that I think can work really great in this vertical. Number one, the Tolos Archetype 2.0. It's a solid shoe. It performs really well in the gym and it has a slightly more casual look to it. The upper is not as breathable, but it does a decent job for most settings and it costs significantly less. Another option to look into is the Balenka Velocity. That model has a really wide midfoot and forefoot and it works really well in a lot of different settings. So those are two shoes that I would look into if the PRIMUS LITE 3.5 isn't necessarily doing it for you. And if you're sold on Vivobarefoot and you want to look into other models, the PRIMUS LITE Knit can be a really good training / casual wear model, and then the Motor Strength can also be a fantastic option if you have a CrossFit bias with your training. When it comes to the sizing and fit of the Vivobarefoot Primus Lite 3.5, it varies a lot. So this shoe, I would say size true for most individuals, but keep in mind that it is going to run long. So for example, I am a true size 10 in most companies' shoes. This model runs long for me. If I go down to a 9, it feels a little bit too short, and obviously I'm not going to go up. So it is one of those gripes that I constantly have with the Vivobarefoot Primus line. And if you are in between sizes, I briefly touched on this earlier, but if you have a narrow or medium foot width, or if you have a finger's thickness or a thumb's thickness of room at the end of your normal shoe's toe box, size down. If you have a wide foot, or if you're typically less than a finger's thickness towards the end of your toe box now in your half size, go up. I think that is the safe call here. Also, if you have a very high instep, keep in mind that this shoe may feel a little bit snug from the jump. You might want to wear longer socks as you break them in because this tongue can have a little bit of friction. That is a very limited case, but it can be an issue for certain foot anatomies. But all that to say, true to size for most individuals. But again, if you have questions on sizing, please drop a comment down below because without half sizes, you do kind of have to plug and play if you are typically in between sizes with your shoes. All right, so now let's cover the weight, heel toe drop, and insole in the Primus Lite 3.5. For my size 10 shoe here, we have a weight of 8.4 ounces. This model's heel toe drop sits at 0 millimeters, and this model does have a thin foam removable insole, and its internal construction is finished, so you're not going to necessarily break this model down faster if you go insoleless for your training or daily wear. All right, now let's break down the construction of the Primus Lite 3.5. Up here on the forefoot, we have a textile and synthetic overlay that wraps around the forefoot here. This gives you additional protection and security when training. This then extends into the medial midfoot here, so it's the same material that goes throughout. I like this material better than what's used in the 3.5. I feel like it maintains its shape a little bit better. Looking at the boot back here, we also have textile overlays and synthetic overlays. There's not a ton of structure to it, so if you like really loose and lightweight boots, you will resonate with this shoe. And on the lateral side, we have this mesh upper with the Vivobarefoot branding. Looking at the midfoot, we have 4 core eyelets that go up with a 5th back here for lace lock. The tongue itself has a low gusset to it, and there is a loop here for security. I don't think the tongue is really going to slide for most individuals because it does sit flat with this thin mesh material here. Looking at the sole of this model, you have that Primus outsole. It is the same lug patterning that you get with most of the Primus models. This model's stack height generally sits around 5.5 millimeters, and then you also have that Ortholite insole in this shoe. So as you can see, it's this thin foam removable insole. But if you have additional questions on this shoe's construction, drop a comment down below. All right, guys, that wraps up my review of the Vivobarefoot Primus Lite 3.5. Now, would I buy this shoe again? In this colorway, no, but if they rolled out more colorways, yes. I have enjoyed this shoe. Honestly, it has maintained its shape a little bit better and its coloring better than my Primus Lite 3, which I got in the bright white. So I do appreciate that with this shoe because this is also a pretty bright white, so I can appreciate that my sweat hasn't completely turned this shoe yellow like in my Primus Lite 3. But if you have additional questions on this shoe and if it's right for you or what you should go with instead of this shoe, drop a comment down below or reach out to me personally, whichever you prefer. And as always, y'all, drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel. I will see you guys in the next one.